monitors, and then I just have this off to the side. So I'm like, I'm not.
Can anyone who's on the phone confirm that they can hear me?
Okay. So I just leave it down. I'm just like, sorry, you won't get to see my face.
Can anyone who's on the phone confirm that they can hear the audio?
Yeah, it's really funny when you have it up.
Can folks who are on the phone hear the audio?
The funny thing is,
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I was just wondering, do you have like an idea of how this
I can hear it.
for this to go? Is it questions throughout, or is it questions at
some
the
guy
end?
was having a conversation with his wife.
Okay.
Just laugh. Okay. It's like, have you been there for a reason?
All right, great. Thanks for the introduction.
Yep.
All right, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming and welcome to this stakeholder session on the report of the draft report of Daymark Energy Advisors on the benefits and costs of utility scale and behind-the-meter solar resources in Maryland. I'm Andrew Johnston. Can folks on the phone hear me okay? I just got a indication that people in the audience might not be. Can folks on the phone?
Good on the phone. Phone is good.
Yep.
All right, great. Again, I'm Andrew Johnston. I'm pinch hitting for John Kuskar, who before he left the commission did head this work group. We have with us today Daymark Energy Advisors and David Littell with the Regulatory Assistance Project, who's also been assisting with this study. Without further ado, I'll pass it to David.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. David Littell with the Regulatory Assistance Project. I'm advising the commission on this. This study, and with that, I just want to know one thing. I believe the copy that was put out up on the website has a confidential mark on it. It is obviously not confidential. It's on a public website, so that should have been removed if there's any question. So I just wanted to clarify that. And with that, introduce Daymark. Kathy will introduce her team. And what I will say and note, any of you who've worked on multiple value of solar studies have seen that the work that Daymark's done together with their subcontractors, including RLC, is really uses some different and groundbreaking methodologies here. It's quite different than other value of solar studies, and it'll be a substantial contribution to the analysis in the literature when it's done, when we get all your comments to finish it. So we look forward to your comments and suggestions and issues that might be looked at. Kathy?
Thanks, David. I'm Kathy Kelly, Principal Consultant with Daymark Energy Advisors. I was the sponsor for this project and advised the team as they move through the study and the analysis. Carrie Gilbert, to my right, is the project manager for the project overall. Matt Lacono, who's here with us, has contributed to many sections of the report, so we thought he'd be a good person to be here today. We have on the phone a number of other representatives from Daymark. We have Tina Bennett, who was project manager and worked with the two partners we had in this effort, RLC Engineering and ESS Group. Also from Daymark, we have Sam Berman, Sam Bobo, Dan Kaler, Dimitri Kordonis, Chrissy Medallo, and Dwarkesh Nalan. From RLC Engineering, we have John Miller, Asa Spruill, and Wayne Whittier, without whom a lot of the distribution-specific analysis would have been quite different. And from ESS Group, we have Stacy Snow and Steve Wood. They are the folks who did a lot of the societal benefit analysis, the health, the land use, and all of that part of the work. If you back up one, since I started with introductions, the agenda as follows: introductions, which we've completed. Carrie will then lead us through the rest of this very short presentation to just kind of put us all in the same place. She'll focus on the study objectives, the current installations, and the potential for future growth, the benefits of solar, and then we'll talk about your feedback. Carrie?
Okay, thanks, Kathy.
So the objectives of this study were to first to look at the amount of solar that was currently online in Maryland, and then look at the potential for future solar within the territories of the 4 investor utilities in Maryland. And then the second objective, which was the bulk of the work, was quantifying the costs and benefits of solar in the service territories of the 4 IOUs in Maryland. We divided these they turned out to mostly be benefits, but we divided these benefits into 3 categories: the bulk power system benefits, the distribution system benefits, and the economic and social benefits. And just to ground us in why we're doing this study is part of the public case 44, and it's funded by Pepco Holdings as part of one of the merger conditions. So just a quick look at where we are with solar installations in Maryland and where we could go. Currently, there's been quite a bit of activity. This graph is showing solar capacity additions over the past 10 years. So you can see 2017 is estimated because we started doing this work back in September, so we didn't have the final data, but there's been as much as over 200 megawatts in 2016 and probably close to that amount in 2017. And looking at the amount of the contribution of this generation by our estimate, and by the end of 2017 there's over 1,000 gigawatt hours of solar generation in Maryland each year. And then we also looked at the potential for additional generation in Maryland, and we looked at this in 3 different ways. The first way was rooftop potential, which is the column that says behind the meter scale area potential. So we looked at the potential for additional rooftop installations, essentially for our behind the meter analysis, and we found that there could be up to about almost 26 megawatts of additional rooftop generation. And then for utility scale generation, we looked at available land for building large scale projects, and that was utility scale projects were defined as those greater than 2 megawatts. We found that there would be land available for over 115,000 megawatts. And then the third way we looked at the technical potential was looking at the hosting capacity of individual distribution feeders. And this analysis results in what could be a limit on the first 2 types of potential. So we would expect that basically we wouldn't expect any more solar to be built without than the hosting capacity. So for example, for BGE, we have our hosting capacity potential of 19 megawatts, and that means you could 19,000 megawatts, and that means you could have up to 19,000 megawatts of rooftop and utility scale resources added with the current distribution hosting capacity. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits. This graph is showing the total benefits that we calculated for both behind the meter and utility scale resources by utility. So these benefits are quite significant. For behind the meter resources, they are they come down over time, primarily because the economic impact is coming down as solar is installed, and the cost of solar is coming down, and the utility scale benefits are going up over time, and that's mostly driven by the some of the market values going up over time. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail into what benefits we looked at. On the bulk power system, these are sort of your traditional market value of energy and capacity. So we looked at avoided energy, which is the basically the avoided market purchase you make if solar is generated. And then energy market price effect. So if you add a large amount of renewables, that has an indirect effect of bringing down market prices because the renewables are zero cost in the market. I mean, they're not zero cost, but they're bidding into the market as a zero cost resource. And then we have avoided capacity, which is the capacity, basically the capacity the impact on the capacity costs in terms of behind the meter resources and the capacity market value of utility scale resources. And then we looked at avoided transmission costs. So adding solar could avoid or defer or reduce investments in transmission, and could also reduce transmission charges due to reductions in the peak load. And then we looked at ancillary services. So could solar impact ancillary service costs? We looked at fuel price hedging. How does adding a fixed cost resource reduce fuel hedging costs? And then we looked at avoided REC purchases. Obviously, solar is a renewable resource which generates RECs, so adding solar could reduce the need for more RECs. And then in terms of distribution system costs and benefits, we looked at the impact of the solar's location on its benefit. So we looked at, basically we consider the location on a distribution line and what impact that had. We looked to see if solar could defer distribution investments. We looked to see how solar could reduce losses in wear and tear in the distribution infrastructure, and what improvements it could make to grid security. We looked to see how adding solar could avoid distribution outages during peak times. We looked at the benefits of controllable solar. So if you have smart inverter, how could that positively impact the grid? And then we looked at the benefits of solar paired with storage. And then the last category of benefits was the economic and social benefits. Here we looked at health benefits. So we looked at the health benefits related to reduced emissions. Environmental benefits is the value of the reduction in emissions. Then water benefits would be the reductions in water use. And then we looked at the impact of solar on agricultural, forested, and vegetated lands. And then we reviewed zoning and planning requirements and policies that could impact solar development. And then I just wanted to show the detailed results for one of the utilities. This is for Potomac Edison. Here you can see this is a behind the meter. So this is the benefits of behind the meter resources in Potomac Edison. So we have basically of the benefits that we were able to quantify. Here's a buildup of the benefit for each year. We looked at a 10-year period, 2019 for 2028. So this is for a, for a project installed in 2019. The benefit in 2019 would be over 40 cents a kilowatt hour, and the bulk of that being the economic benefits. But there's also the next being avoided energy, and as time goes on, the non-monetized CO2 benefit becomes a larger contributor. And then for utility scale, the avoided energy, avoided capacity are larger percentages of the benefit, but the economic benefits is still quite a large piece.
Do you want us to ask questions as you go along, or when you're done?
I think at the end, which is actually coming up
Okay.
right away, right now actually. So that's a quick overview. And now we want to open up for your feedback.
If folks wouldn't mind approaching the microphone, that way people on the phone can hear us. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Bill Fields with the Office of People's Counsel. If you could just go back a slide. I was trying to see in the draft report somewhere where those gray bars at the top, the economic benefits, were broken out by the categories you talked about. Is that there and I'm not seeing it, or is that something that you could do?
The
Economic benefits broken out by the
It's good to have me on time delay. You never know.
So so are you saying could we? So the economic benefits are actually the economic benefits are not actually included as a piece here, but the economic benefits are the impact to Maryland's economy by adding solar. So that was just one piece of analysis. That was the in-plan analysis at the end. And Matt,
We could add that though as a component. I don't know if that's in there now.
No.
But we can add that as a component to the list.
Yeah, I'm not following.
I think what you're
I thought the gray bar was an add up of the components you just had on the slide you just had up there. Now I understand the job, I thought that the job impact was part of that gray bar as well, but maybe it's not.
I think the point is that the job and the impact on Maryland's economy is all of that gray bar, and then some of those other pieces like health benefits and the non-monetized CO2 benefit are also other benefits on that slide, and then like the value of emissions is actually captured under the avoided energy. So that gray bar is really looking at just the impact to Maryland's economy, not the environmental benefits. If that helps.
Okay.
And keep in mind that economic benefit is divided by the solar that's installed. So it's over the number of kWh that we assume are generated over that time frame. So it's divided by just the kWh from solar.
Okay, I see. Okay. I'll ask a few more questions while I'm standing here. On the distribution system benefits, I read and I saw some. That's not part of this chart, is the way I understand it. And I read there were some examples, some illustrative examples, and that sort of thing. For the final report, is that the way it's going to stay, or is there more analysis that you're doing to try to value something along those lines?
No, I think the challenge with the distribution system benefits is that they're very location specific. So the example we gave would be if you were to install solar in a location where adding it would be beneficial. But that wouldn't be true for every project. So we did provide an alternative stack which included that benefit, but it didn't seem right to include it in our main result because it was location specific.
Okay. You said a little bit about how particularly the behind the meter benefits were going down over time. I didn't quite follow that. Could you explain that again?
Yeah. So we're looking at
around on you, but
that's okay. So the economic benefits for the behind the meter resources are going down over time, and I think part of that is due to the investment to achieve the same number of megawatts. That cost goes down over time. We're assuming a decline in the cost of solar. So when you're thinking about pumping money into Maryland's economy, which is the economic benefit piece, as the cost of solar declines, that there will be a decline there.
Why would utility scale not decline proportionally?
It's a matter of how the costs for
Can you repeat the question for everybody on the phone?
Why would utility scale?
I'll repeat the question. Sorry.
Yeah.
The question was, why will utility scale not decrease the same as behind the meter? And that has to do with the economic analysis. It's about the costs that go into it. So you have the cost of installation. You have the costs of the
Soft costs that are going down, that you think are going down that much.
well, you have the soft costs as well as the hardware costs. They'll also go down as well.
But not for utilities. You're saying.
I don't think
It-
people
I don't think we're
can hear. If you don't mind, go on the mic if you have a series of questions.
I actually think that they are going down some. It's just that
It's the degree.
it's the degree, and also it looks the economic benefits are a bigger part of the benefits for the behind the meter resources. So they basically, the appearance is that they're going down. It's more of a driver. So if you look at the utility scale resources, the bulk power system benefits like avoided energy are a bigger part of the benefit, and those are going up over time. So it's kind of a combination of factors.
It's not easy to see in the charts on a relative basis, but if you took a look at the numbers behind these charts, it might show it better.
Yeah, and those numbers are all located in the appendix.
Right.
If you wanted to look at them.
All right, I'll ask one more and then let somebody else ask some questions. Could you talk a little bit more? Well, David said at the beginning that you did this in took a different approach than other states. And I mean, I noticed that there wasn't much discussion of the surveys that were done in other states or this type of analysis. Could you talk a little bit more about the difference in your approach versus what's been done in some of the other states?
Well, I think some of our approach is fairly similar. Like avoided energy, we use a production cost model. I think that's a pretty standard approach. We developed a model of the capacity market in PJM. I think that's also a pretty standard approach. I think a lot of the innovation happened in the distribution planning piece. Looking at the benefits there, RLC was, really dug into what benefits might be, and
I think the other area is in the hedging, looking at the benefits from hedging, which aren't added here because we just thought it was not appropriate to try and add them because it's such a difficult thing to deal with. But we used a new approach to look at that.
Okay. So this chart is a similar approach. Have you done, or is there any analysis that you've done comparing the results you found for Maryland here with what's been found for other states?
Not in the report. We have looked at that, but not in the report. One of the things that a lot of the other states did not do is add the economic benefits. They talked about them, put them in the reports, but they didn't add them to the stack.
All right, thanks.
Tyler Butler with MEA. I just wanted to ask about the footnote that was below these graphs talking about that locational additional value. What data was used to come up with the 11 cents per kilowatt hour?
Wayne, could one of you folks from RLC address that question?
I couldn't hear the question really good. I'd ask you to repeat it, please. This is Wayne Whittier.
Okay, so once again, there's a footnote below these graphs talking about the different locational added value for these solar installations. Can you describe what data was used and how you came up with the specific 11 cents per kilowatt hour?
Sure. I think a lot of it is right in the note. We assume that, for this example, that a 2 megawatt project could avoid $2 million worth of distribution investment, and that number we use as a proxy from our experience in other jurisdictions where we've seen that either some reconductoring or maybe some transformer replacements had to happen in a substation or something like that, and we've seen some examples where costs in that order might happen. Lots of times it's less cost than that is needed to interconnect.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, this is not based off any actual data for the state of Maryland. Is that correct?
No, it's based upon our experience of what we saw for actual costs on other systems. We've seen costs from from nothing to a few $100,000 to upwards to $5 million to interconnect solar systems. That's real numbers we've seen in other places, but we picked the middle of the road representative cost.
Okay, so you don't look at this as like a high water mark or the low water mark. You're shooting for a middle of the road number here.
This is someplace in the middle, But there will be many circuits where the cost will be lower, and there will be some where it'll be higher.
Okay, and to come up with a more specific locational number for various parts throughout the state, what kind of data would be required to conduct an analysis of that?
Yeah. To do that, we would do a specific modeling of that circuit. We get all the circuit parameters, including the way the load is distributed on it, the way other renewables might already be distributed along the road. We would get the information about the wire sizes, and we'd get information about the substation transformer capacity. We'd put all of that into our model that we use, and see if there would be overloads or any violations on that circuit, and then come up with solutions to those problems, whether it's voltage regulators, reconductoring some of the line, replacing a transformer. It could be a mixture of those things. And then we would cost out those particular improvements that would be needed for that interconnection. So it'd be a very circuit-specific analysis.
And is that something that could be conducted as some sort of addendum to this to try to come up with a better idea of what locational values we're looking at throughout the state?
That could be done for any particular circuit, but somebody would have to decide what circuit to study, what to assume for an installation of solar, and all of the data would have to be provided. It's not a trivial study. It's probably, to do that study for a circuit is probably a $20,000 study or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Bob Borlick. I'm an energy consultant based out of Washington, D.C. I looked at your study, and I'm very interested in this economic benefits component that you have. I'm assuming that what this is equal to is the increase in the state's the state GDP. Is this right? That's the measure? Okay. Now we know that GDP is a value-added concept. In other words, when you build a power plant, like one of the solar plants, you've got land, labor, capital. You have some equipment, materials that go into it, and all of those expenditures add to the GDP of the state. Now, the power plant, once it's completed, has a market value, and say the IPP sells this power plant to a utility. Now, you can't count the sale of the power plant, the market value of the power plant, and also the market value of all those inputs to the power plant. So my question is, I'm assuming that IMPLAN has subtracted out those inputs. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, but I'd want to double check that.
Okay, so now we have, so in effect, the addition to the GDP is the market value of the power plant. Well, less those costs. The next question is, how much is a utility willing to pay for a plant like this? And because the utility can buy power from the PJM, the same amount of energy, it's basically the present value of the alternative of buying all that energy from PJM over the useful life of the plant, say 25 years in the case of solar. That's usually the assumption, that solar has a 25-year lifespan. So basically, that determines the value of the plant. But I noticed that you've got here avoided energy, avoided capacity. Those costs, those components are exactly the same as what go into valuing the power plant itself. So it looks to me like you've double counted this. You can't count those costs twice, and which raises the question of whether this is legitimate to take this GDP concept and to just lay it right on top of all the other costs. No other state has done this. And in fact, you know, the best value of solar study that I know of is the one that was done for the state of Minnesota. They have not included this. They talk about it because there are some secondary effects, you know, in terms of you know, the what do you call it, the leveraging, the creation of jobs, secondary job creation that's separate and apart from the primary expenditures. But and I'm sure that implant has captured those as well from your study you claim that you have. So there may be something there, but it's not this full cost. The other thing that troubles me, and I couldn't find reference to this in your study anywhere, when you make an expenditure, when you invest in this solar facility, that means that there's something else. There's that money that goes into the solar facility, unless you assume that it's sitting somewhere, you know, in a bank account and not doing anything. That money is money that can't be spent on something else in the economy, which means that there's an opportunity cost here that you have to subtract out. It goes even further. Let's say that you build one of the utility scale plants. You're assuming that it has a capacity value, and it does. I agree with that. But what that means is that the utility itself is going to defer building a conventional power plant, whether it's a fossil-fired, gas-fired peak, or most likely, or maybe a combined cycle plant. But you know, depending on its system planning process, what's optimal. There's a plant out there that it's not going to build. So you have to subtract off what it would have spent on that plant and all the jobs it would have created, and what that construction for that plant, or the procurement of that plant, would have added to the state's GDP. Did you do that?
I think what this economic analysis did is it looked at the investment. Clearly, you're correct, in the solar, and what that investment would then generate as far as jobs and added value in the state of Maryland.
Yeah.
There are issues with trying to do this economic analysis.
Well, but
that
the
are
thing is,
definitely there. Putting it on here and adding it does not imply that we think that the utilities should pay 19 or 20 cents per kilowatt hour for the solar.
but that's exactly what it implies. Anybody that just looks at this chart, you know, most people aren't going to read the fine print. They're going to look at that chart and say, holy shit, you know, 30 cents, 40
what
cents.
What this chart says is, from a societal standpoint, that's the value of doing that. It's bringing in economic advantages to the state, assuming all the money stays here, assuming the money gets invested here. But the actual value to the utilities is the avoided hard information that's on that chart. It's the avoided transmission investment, the avoided RECs, and all of those things. We are not meaning to imply that that's what somebody gets paid for it.
But when you say
what we're doing here is saying, what is the advantage and what's the value of solar to the society? So to society, there have to be economic benefits. Now, I'll go back and we'll take a look at some of your questions and try to answer what was added, what was subtracted out.
But I have to take issue even with your statement that these are societal benefits, because I don't think you've netted off the costs, the fact that there are opportunity costs here, and I think you've double counted the economic benefits. I mean, you know, I have no problem with the utility paying whatever the societal cost is, or the state subsidizing that, which they do through net metering on the rooftop side. But let's not subsidize something where the societal costs are not there. So
I understand your point. We have to go back and take a look at the implant analysis and make sure that that netting is occurring.
okay.
But can't answer your question here right now. Sorry about that.
Arjun Makhijani, Institute for Energy and Environmental Research.
This is Wayne Whittier at RLC. Could I go back a question, please?
Hold on. Just, someone began speaking right before you. We'll take you next, sir. Go ahead.
I am now much more confused than I was when I first looked at this study. All right, honestly. You have on this chart a list: health benefits, non-monetized societal benefits. You had that list if you go back to that societal and economic. Yeah, that health, environmental, water, loss of open space, which would presumably be negative or netted out with loss of open space if you mine coal or do natural gas, and impact on planning and zoning. I thought, because they are those things, at least some of the top two are actually in the chart next to the gray bar, that you valued those health benefits and environmental benefits, and the text also seemed to read that way. Now you're telling me that you didn't do that.
No, that's not what we're telling you. Sorry.
Okay.
We did.
So I am confused.
We did value the health benefits and the non-monetized CO2. It's on the chart. The health benefits are it's a small benefit, but it's that little pink line below the gray, and then the non-monetized CO2 is the purple, right? So it goes gray, then little pink line, then the purple line. The purple thicker piece. So the non-monetized CO2 is that purple piece. It's right on the chart.
And the gray bar? The gray bar is all sort of stimulation of economic activity?
Yep, exactly.
I think I have to think about it, but I currently don't know whether I have a problem with it or not. I might share some of the concerns. I have a couple of suggestions. I think the distribution benefits should be in some of these bars, because that's a direct value benefit. I agree with you that it is locational, but I think it would be worthwhile giving some general idea in the Maryland context, because it depends on, I have solar on my roof, nobody else in my neighborhood practically. There are two other solar and hundreds of houses, so the value of my solar is currently pretty high to the system, because my electrons pop into my neighbor's house and avoids a lot more cost than if everybody else in my neighborhood had solar. So I think to some extent, as you grow the capacity, unless you have storage and other ways to offset the distribution value, some technical discussion of the variable value of solar is really needed. When the density of solar is low, as it is currently in almost all places to my knowledge in Maryland, maybe some neighborhoods might not have low density, the value of solar will be very high. You're avoiding 15%. You're avoiding in the summer losses. You're avoiding peaking capacity. It's a huge benefit, and you've tried to indicate some of that. But I do think it needs, rather than that gray bar, you need to have the distribution benefits that are at least a little more specific to Maryland. The other thing is, I do notice you do address storage, but again, I do think it's important to know that currently, if I put storage in my solar, it's not going to add any value to the system. It may add some value to me. But as the solar grows and the density of solar grows, especially if you have aggregation ability and smart grid and smart inverters, which you allude to, the value of that system with storage is going to be huge and much, much bigger than if you don't have storage. Similarly, demand response and so on. I think it's been too lightly covered. I haven't read every page, I must confess, but from looking at the study and the things that you have, I do think that valuing solar and putting it in the context of an evolving renewable energy economy, because we are trying to get the high penetration. Did you assume like a 5% in 2030, or what number did you assume for penetration in 2030?
Well, we went out to 2028, so we assumed
2028, yeah.
that there would be around 5,700 megawatts of solar in Maryland at that point.
Okay.
So I think that I can't remember off the top of my head what percent.
That's about
that-
10%.
About 10, yeah.
So about 10% of generation. And my last comment is, the red bars are obviously the generation offset. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Okay, let's go quickly to the gentleman on the phone who tried to get a question in earlier.
It was Wayne.
It was Wayne.
Yeah,
Wayne.
Not a question really. I answered the gentleman's question a couple back about the 11 cents, and I actually answered the wrong question. My explanation was about what would the cost be if the addition of solar required some improvements to the system. And that really wasn't the question. The question was, where did the savings come from? And the same approach was used, but the circumstances would be different. The circumstances would be that the addition of solar allowed the utility to avoid putting in a new transformer, for instance, or avoid reconductoring a piece of line. And so the same math would apply, but it's in the opposite direction, and I just didn't want to leave that misstatement out there. I kind of explained how when solar caused increased costs, how that was calculated. Same thing goes, but in the other direction. Sorry for the confusion.
Just to jump back in on that topic, so was everything else you said correct, that this is kind of a middle of the road approach, or does some of that other stuff change?
It does go both ways.
What?
Yeah, it is still a middle of the road approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is neither the high end or the low end. They were trying to develop some kind of average cost or average value of that then?
That's correct, right, Wayne?
I don't know if I could go as far as to say it would necessarily be the average, but it is in the middle of the cost we see. The same devices I was talking about for added cost would apply to avoided cost. If they could avoid the replacement of a transformer, that would be a more expensive project. If they could avoid reconductoring a line because it helps offset load on the line, rebuilding lines is expensive, especially in underground situations. But it's a little bit of a leap to say it's necessarily an average. I couldn't do that.
Okay, so do you have any sense of like where projects normally fall on that continuum then? Like, do they fall more on the high side, more on the low side, to give a better sense of what this number is trying to tell us?
I think in the middle is a better place to say that it would fall than on one end or the other.
I think Wayne isn't quite ready to say it's the average, but he's saying it's in the middle of the two extremes.
Yeah, but obviously the frequency of how often one upgrade occurs compared to another would obviously change the calculus quite significantly, potentially.
Yeah, I can't give you what the system-wide average would be on that. But yeah, I would guess that probably for more often than not, the addition of solar. No, I can't even say that. I can't tell you where it's going to come out on the average, but it's not going to be at the high end, and it's not going to be at the low end. That much I can say.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Allison Williams. I work at EEI as an electric institute. Thank you for clarifying that you don't intend to use this to inform rate design. Although I would caution you to put a disclaimer. Oh, you do. You do intend to use this.
I'm not sure exactly how this is going to be used. I think you're going to have to ask the
So can you
folks who do it.
clarify what you just said about how you don't intend to use this to inform compensation for solar?
What I intended to say is that this is a societal perspective. How it is used is going to be up to the people who are trying to make policy and that sort of thing. I also wanted to make sure that the very hard costs are the ones that the utility sees.
Yeah.
So I was just pointing out the two differences in the numbers. One is a softer economic cost that everyone sees in the society, And the other costs are nice and hard, and they're a lot easier for us to put our arms around.
I appreciate that. I think that's a very nice intellectual framing for something that is going to be intended and looked at very practically. So I would highly suggest that you put a disclaimer to that extent, that you see this simply as a societal calculation and not something that would translate equally on a kilowatt-hour basis to rate design. That's how anyone who is coming to this is going to view it, as you are advocating for a 42-cent a kilowatt-hour rate for behind-the-meter solar. That's just, you open it, you look at the chart, and that is what someone is going to think. So I would just caution you about that right off the bat.
Okay.
Second, I want to address the other studies that have been conducted across the country, and I think it would really behoove you to put in a comparison in here to show just how high the value that you have is. It is above and beyond any value of solar study that has ever been conducted in the country. And obviously, the reason for that is because of how astronomical your economic benefits calculations are. And so, lastly, I mean, I may come up here again, but I would like to talk about in-plan. I was an in-plan modeler, and I would like to second Mr. Borlick's comments that these are gross benefits. You did not net out the possible impacts and economic benefits of all the other resources or all the other investment dollars that could have gone to any other resource had it not gone to solar. And that's really important for anyone who's coming to this report to understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ibrahim. Let's go on the engineering side a little bit, a lot of economic talks, but I would like to find out on report page 123, you have a solar penetration, and then load is going down, and then the time we need this solar PV, evening is not there. So, and then on your figure 48, and you trying to reference that figure to the figure 49 from California, which is duck neck. They call duck neck. So I'm trying to figure out because high concentration of the solar on the system will cause a lot of problem for distribution system. So I don't know how you solve that problem, because if the solar enter a lot and then you displace load or whatever, transmission distribution will be conjected. I don't know how you solve that problem, and then how that go also into the economic analysis, because you displacing some, you bring in some, and sometimes you need to have a dispatchable unit somewhere online, and to respond to when you decrease in solar, you augmenting some of the cities and coming online. So it's a lot of problem here. I'm trying to figure out how you solve that problem. And you focus on we don't see distribution here, part of the benefit of distribution. You're talking about transmission. And then what impact, how much this economic take from the LMP, can you give me the threshold for this study, how much you take in the LMP? For example, in BGNE zone, you can have, for example, megawatt hours can be like 40. If you enter all these resources in BGNE area, you could reduce BGNE LMP by maybe $5 or $15. What is the magnitude of that? We'd like to know that, because that's part of the economic analysis. When PJM dispatch generations and then everything meet the load, sometimes every zone is different, and then we set LMP for every zone, and then some zones are conjected, some are not. So, and then if we build no more, lot of generation in BGNE area, it's going to take some constraint on the systems, and we want to know how much that will be in relation to the PJM LMP.
There are a lot of questions in that
Yeah,
question.
I was gonna say,
Okay.
I think
It's really, I
I
want
think
to
we
know
can
two things.
dispatch with your
things, just two
last
things.
question most easily.
Yes.
And then we'll bring in Wayne Whittier, who's on the phone again.
Okay.
But I think your last questions were regarding the avoided energy and the impact on market prices by adding.
LMP, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if you look at our chart, and we have this for all the utilities and for behind the meter and utility scale resources, we ran Aurora, which is a production cost model, to basically figure out what the energy, the LMPs would be, the value that the solar is providing. So that's the red piece. And then we did a separate analysis, which was with and without solar on the system. And as I said earlier, we have, there's about 1,000 megawatts now, and we added another 4,700 megawatts. So by adding those 4,700 megawatts of solar by 2028, there's a small market
Getting
price
a lot
impact.
of noise on the phone.
And that is, it's kind of hard to see on our chart because it's quite small, but it's that teeny little yellow bar below the green avoided capacity. I think on the utility scale, no, it's still quite small, but it's a little bit easier to see. So there's a small market price impact
Okay.
of adding that zero cost marginal resource. And then for the other parts of your question, you may have to repeat.
Wayne.
I don't know if Wayne got them.
No, I didn't get them. They're
Okay.
not very good.
Wayne, this gentleman had some questions on figure 48 on page 123 and figure 49
49.
130.
It is on the...
on page 130. And
yes.
and I'm afraid I've forgotten exactly what the question was.
Well,
What did you exactly want to know about those figures?
I mean, you know, you're talking about the solar penetration, and you define a lot of construction in Maryland area. While the solar is coming on, we don't have. It's going to reduce the generation megawatt consumption, but it does not line up exactly with the load. You understand? It comes before the load, and then load come in the evening, and the solar come before that. So I'm trying to see the discrepancy between the two, how you resolve that problem in this model.
Does that help you, Wayne?
I still didn't get everything, but I'm trying to get to the figures.
Okay, you do have a look at your figure 48. You do have a load going down, all the way down, and then they come up in the evening. So the solar is on. We can reduce the generation from the other side, and then solar is not on. The generation need to come from somewhere. So while that is on, how did you resolve that differences a bit, switching from the solar to generations, another generation that will respond to this? You know, how did you, also remove the problem? Because you're talking about here, two ways direction of the flow, and then I know that will cause problem, and then and they cause conjunctions. So how did you resolve those problems? You're talking about voltage regulation, voltage right through, frequency right through. How did you resolve those problems, really? This is the thing, because that's the key thing for the BGE to accept your study. If you don't have no solution for that, how BGE will be able to say yes, we're going to implement this project? You need to have some kind of transition between the solar coming on and the coming off, and then all the kind of things solar cause to the systems.
Yeah, I apologize. I still haven't got the slide in front of me. I'm looking for it right
Then
now.
I'll move on. Thank you.
Okay, now I've got, what page was that on?
123?
Okay, just a second.
It's figure 48, Wayne. And I think the question is,
Okay.
we've got solar coming on, and then the solar's going off, and how do you address the fact that you need to ramp up to meet that load and all the other considerations relative to that in this picture? And then also in relationship to the picture on page 130.
Yep. So this slide on figure 48, I believe, believe, is simply the subtraction of the solar energy from the load curve and the result. I can't quite read that. Sorry,
Wait.
I'm jumping around too much.
Excuse me. When let's take that discussion offside. We're gonna talk to each other, okay?
Yeah.
That
All
was
right,
what I
thank
was
you.
just about to suggest. Thank you.
Hey guys. So I'm Carl Robigo. I'm with Pace Energy and Climate Center in White Plains, New York. I have a bunch of questions because I'm intellectually curious about this topic and have been for a while. First, let me just share a couple of quick comments for you. The Minnesota study was different because the Minnesota study was dictated by the statute that we wrote that dictated the Minnesota study. So you have to look at the statute first, and then you'll see what it tried to cover and why and how the statute was made. That's sausage. We can't cover that. Second of all, your graphs are completely consistent with experience and other value of solar studies, notwithstanding what the lady from EEI said. All the way back to the first value of solar study that was conducted for City of Austin in 2006. They conducted a companion economic benefits study that showed that, no, I'm sorry, not all the way back to that, all the way back to Small is Profitable, the book we published at RMI in 2002, but also calculated in the study that Austin Energy did in 2006. The economic benefits typically come on to be 4, 6, maybe 10 times higher than the so-called rate-making benefits. As you correctly pointed out, and I thought you were perfectly reasonable in how you articulated this, there is a question for the policymakers and for the rate makers to decide what gets reflected in the compensation rate that a customer ultimately receives and where those compensation streams come from. So anyway, just to get those comments off the top. So I guess here's my first just very simple, maybe this is a hard question. What question? How would you phrase the question that this study is trying to answer?
I would say that we are trying to capture the benefits of solar within the service territories of the investor-owned utilities in Maryland.
Okay. All right. And benefits you're doing just broadly, right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, good. The study talks, and your diagrams show 2019 through 2028. We've talked about 25-year useful life on a solar system. Most value of solar studies use an 8760 for each year for the useful life and then backcast it through a levelization process, kind of like an IRB, trying to compare disparate resources. Did you do that? It looks like I've just got 10 incremental estimates year by year. Did you look at the full 25, or did you try to capture the full 25-year lifetime benefits of the solar?
No, we haven't done that. We did.
Okay.
We do have an extended look out to 20 years in our appendix.
Oh, okay.
But this, I would say, like if you're looking at 2019, and you imagined a kilowatt hour of solar was generated in that year, those would be the market benefits that provides, and the emissions benefits are also tied to our Aurora model, our production cost model.
Right.
So we haven't. These represent, I guess, I would say, the benefit of a kilowatt hour of solar generated in those years. If you wanted to calculate the benefit of a megawatt of solar constructed in 2019, you could do a levelization calculation as you described.
Okay, so I think I understand it. So a simplistic way to say it might be, these are the value for as available power, but not the resource value of solar.
Can you define what you mean by the resource value of
Meaning
solar?
you install the asset and have
Over its life.
expectations about its operations over useful life. Most value of solar studies that do the second do things like they talk about the decremental output. You didn't even have to address that.
No, yeah, we didn't have
You're
to
just
address
taking
that. Yeah,
AWH that shows up.
we
in
did
some-
address the decremental output in only so much as when we added our 4,700 megawatts of solar,
Uh-huh.
when we made assumptions about how much energy it generated, I believe we assumed that there'd be a 5% per year decrease in
In
that
that block.
generation, in that block.
Okay.
So when we did our modeling for like the energy market price effects, we took that into effect in terms of how much energy was being produced by the solar on the system. I believe we incorporated that, but we didn't say if you install a solar project in 2020, this is the levelized benefit over the life of the project.
Okay.
We haven't done that analysis.
All right, thank you. And that I'm glad I'm reading it the way you wrote it.
This is Wayne Whittier again.
Oh, sorry.
Hello.
Hey, Wayne.
Go ahead, Wayne.
I've familiarized myself with those two graphs. If you want to talk about those a little bit more, I could do that now.
Okay, we'll get back to you, Wayne. We're in the middle of another question.
Oh, I thought he finished. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah,
Great.
no.
Thanks.
This is Carl Robgo. It's nobody gets off that easy. I'm sorry. The microphone is open, and here I am. Okay, so distribution benefits. I think I understood where you guys settled out on the middle but not average, or middle-ish kind of but not average number. I get that statistically for what we're talking about here, but other studies have tried to quantify a generalized distribution benefit. The lawyers would say inchoate. It's just, it produces a benefit that's generalized over time, but that is not yet really acute because we don't have a distribution upgrade, or we don't have a high congestion level or a high marginal distribution capacity cost showing up at a particular point. Your study, am I correct in assuming it says there's no value to the distribution grid of having solar unless we get to one of those locations where we conduct one of those $20,000 feeder studies?
I think the issue that the reason we felt we couldn't add a bar to the chart was because of the concern that there may be places where adding solar to a particular distribution feeder would add a cost. And so we didn't want to say on a system-wide that there was a specific benefit we could add to that chart. I think there would be potential, as the gentleman said earlier, for a more detailed study that might be able to provide information about benefits in specific places in the distribution system. But I think the concern, and correct me if
I think I get
yeah.
that. Right, you don't want to say that it's always positive or it's never more than zero, never less than zero, if it could be less.
Yeah, and that was the purpose of providing that illustrative example, was say if there are benefits, this is about how much they could be. And so
But this is Wayne Whittier again. Let me add to that, though. Usually what we've seen, if there are costs involved, the developer pays for those. But if there are savings, the utility or society benefits from those.
Yeah, now hang on, Wayne. We're not talking about interconnection. What Carl, this is David Littell, is asking about is, it's sort of, everyone here is focused on the diagram, right? Which is what people do when you produce a diagram. But diagrams are oversimplifications, and so I'll just say that because a lot of people are focused on that. What is and isn't in it. My only observation is, Carl, there is text that I read on the plane on the way down that in here that says that the distribution benefit is somewhere between a few cents and 10 cents. And so, I had a minor question on that, on why it didn't say 13 cents, but we'll work on that because that's what's elsewhere. So that is acknowledged in the text. I think what you're hearing, your issue is why isn't it in the graph, and that's what you're talking about. But the report does say that there is a distribution benefit, and it gives that general range. At least that's the text that's in there now, and everyone should be aware of that if you want to comment on that.
Well, I guess then I join with my colleagues at EEI in saying that I guess we're all concerned about the appearance of the chart. But, and by the way, just to make this absolutely clear for an old fart like me, the white space either side of the thin slices is meant to show you the thin slices, but it has no value itself? Or is it part of the value above, the part of the value below, or the part of the value either side of the thin slice? Because it does push the total bar up, right?
That is a question for our chart making guru, who I'm not sure is on the phone. I would be shocked if the top of the chart is any higher because of the white spaces.
But, right? Somebody once told me that pencil lines on the 747 drawing added 7 inches to the plane, but now we have AutoCAD. So, yeah, if you can just help explain that, because I stared at it, and again, maybe it's just old eyes. All right, I have a question about the hosting capacity issue. When does it become a factor? Is there a threshold that does this study assume it's 0 and you stop there? There's no cost associated with adding hosting capacity because you just planned up to hosting capacity, or how does it work in here?
Wayne?
Wayne, did you catch that?
Yeah, it's basically what we think can be done with very minimal cost. It doesn't mean that that's where the hosting would have to stop, but it's where it have to stop without significant cost.
Right.
If, for instance, we did not include upgrading substations transformers as a mechanism to increase the whole, went with what the capacities were. We did not assume larger wires on the circuits. We went with what is already installed. So it's hosting capacity that can be accommodated with minor improvements, such as perhaps adding some voltage regulators along the line or something like that, or a few capacitors here or there. But nothing significant like rebuilding a line or replacing the substation transformer.
So then this study doesn't try to look at what net or additional gross benefits, or I guess net benefits would be available if significant investments were made in these 10 years on increasing hosting capacity.
You are correct.
And does it account for planned deployments of DADMS and storage and any other, and electric vehicles and any other technologies and devices that might have the effect of increasing hosting capacity during the study period?
No, this is based upon current conditions or the year studied. Asa Sproul, can you confirm if I got that right or not?
There was language that said it's a snapshot. That's kind of where I was going. Is that?
I wanted to add, there are a lot of qualitative statements in there that address those issues, Carl, but you're focused on the quantitative, and that's the answer that you got from Wayne Whittier, right? But there is a lot of qualitative observations on storage and integration.
Good, thank you. And you just mentioned one a few minutes ago, but a similar question on what the current or expected build-out of solar, why that matters. So one of the places you said it shows up is when you're estimating the hedging value or the market price value, and not the hedging, the market price effects, because you assume that 4,700 build-out. Where else does the expected build-out of solar, the baseline or the expected build-out of solar, impact the quantitative outputs?
I would say it impacts almost all of the categories. It would impact the avoided energy and the energy market price effects, like I just said. Our capacity model is, I think, incorporates the solar that we're planning on. Although well, Matt, how much does the amount of solar impact the capacity price?
It won't have as much of an impact in the capacity price just due to the other more expensive resources in the stack.
Yeah,
so
it's included. So it's likely limited impact. The avoided RECs, it doesn't matter at all. And then the transmission investment, the amount of solar does not, I'm actually not sure if it, I think well, we're assuming some avoided transmission investments because of solar. There's two pieces to the transmission investment. There's a transmission charge and a transmission investment piece. And so the transmission charge, I don't think, would be impacted by the amount of solar, but the transmission investment, at least the concept of adding solar is how we're avoiding the transmission investment, so it would impact that. And then the health benefits and the non-monetized CO2, those are results of the amount of emissions avoided that generates those numbers is based on the Aurora modeling. And then also the economic benefits is impacted by the amount of solar.
Okay.
So most of them, but not all.
Okay, thanks. And on the transmission, which you just mentioned, there's two value streams, the transmission charge, which you assume every kilowatt hour solar helps avoid, but then there's transmission projects, which depend on the existence of projects and which utility is facing them? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so our transmission, well, our transmission expert may or may not be on the phone, but basically the way the transmission investment piece worked is we had a list of all the planned transmission projects that would impact, could be impacted by adding additional resources in Maryland.
And what was the horizon on that you looked at there?
It's a 2-year horizon.
2-year horizon.
Because after that, the expenses of those projects could go a lot higher, which would offset any of the savings. So you can only look at it over a shorter period of time.
2 years.
And it's those supplemental projects that transmission owners would be doing, not what PJM has passed.
Gotcha.
So it's more of your like aging infrastructure, reinforcements, extension projects.
Okay.
And they are listed in there. And it was looked at specifically for BGE and DPL, but you could I think the BG assumptions were carried through the other two utilities.
I remember.
It was about 3 or 4%, I believe, is that impact.
Okay. So this might sound I think it's my last couple questions. So, a lot of studies do use as a convenience looking at market prices for an indicator of avoided energy, and that's the approach you took too. But markets produce short-run marginal prices, not even marginal cost. They're driven by short-run marginal costs. They produce short-run marginal prices. No utility would build a power plant and pay for it only with short-run marginal prices. How do you reconcile the difference between a market-revealed short-run price and the value of the energy that's actually avoided by a solar generator? It's sort of like if you read the definition of PURPA, it says the costs that are avoided by the purchase of energy and capacity from a qualifying facility, not the energy and capacity costs that are avoided, all the costs that are avoided, sort of the total avoided cost view. So did you consider that if you had to build that much energy, a facility that generated that energy, as our friends in the Midwest and with coal plants are finding today, the market price of energy won't get you there? No.
I was just going to say, give us a few days, give that some thought,
Yeah.
and we'll get back to you.
All right, thanks a lot.
Because I think we've thought about it, but it's not not in this document.
Okay. Well, thank you for your patience and your answers.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of quick ones here. I want to respond to Carl's last comment about short-run marginal cost or marginal prices. In fact, if you take the present value of the stream of short-run prices, that and gives you the long-run marginal cost, and that's the basis for building a power plant. So, Carl, that all gets captured in a contract. But let me go back to a couple of other things. These are minor compared to the comments I had regarding economic benefits, but they're still ideological, methodological. One is you're taking credit for the energy market price effects, and you're showing this as a benefit. And it is a benefit to consumers. buyers of energy benefit from this market price depression. But the thing is that for every dollar that the consumer gains, there's a generator out there that loses that dollar. So what you have here is a mere transfer payment from one party to another. There is no benefit to that. There is no economic gain. And from a societal perspective, it's a wash. So I would take issue. I know that the solar people love this avoided cost. The demand response people love this, this market price effect. But in fact, it's a bogus concept. The third point was something that this gentleman brought up about figures 48 and 49. And that's that as you bring on more and more solar, you get this problem of the duck curve that California has, where you have to have fast ramping capacity in the power pool, PJM, to be able to respond quickly when solar ramps up in the morning and when it falls off in the evening. And typically that, in California, they're having to go out and buy specialized aeroderivative CTs that can respond quickly, or you have to have excess capacity online, excess peakers, just to serve that ramp up and that and the ramp down. So, and that typically comes under the category of the integration costs, the cost of integrating an intermittent resource. So that's something that you don't have on this chart. Now, maybe given the amount of solar you're bringing on, maybe it's not an issue, because Maryland is only a small part of PJM. Although the PEPCO BG&E area is transmission constrained, so that could be an issue. And the last thing is, the dollars that you're showing, are these nominal dollars or are they real dollars?
They're nominal dollars.
Oh, that's what I thought. Okay, those are my last comments.
And I'll just ask, we've got a lot of smart people in the room, but this is really an opportunity for public comment, who have different perspectives. Go back and forth between yourselves. These are all good comments, so thank you. No. But we could at least go through everyone initially, and you will have an opportunity for written comment. These are all good comments, and I'm following all of them, and I know Daymark is as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. John Murek here for BGE and also for PEPCO and Delmarva. We kind of combined our thoughts on this one, so you only get one of us this time. So I'm going to start with an appreciative note. We do appreciate the opportunity to provide comment and ask questions, and also the work that went into it. We know it's no simple undertaking, so I'll start with something nice, and we'll take but we do look forward. From today, we have a lot of questions. We're going to raise some concerns, and I'll just put up front: we ask for, we request, we're open to further conversation, particularly with some of the economic specialists we have, the technical specialists we have on the topics that I'll cover. Okay, so we'll start. We too feel the analysis assumptions across the value attributes appear to be overly optimistic. And we've dug through the study, looked at the appendix, and we didn't see enough of the base assumptions, nor the modeling, nor the calculations to be able to put the numbers back together ourselves to give you a more precise critique, if you will, pushback, if you will. And we're candidly we would ask that that modeling be shared, the assumptions be shared in more detail, because at the end of the day, we value this study. There was a back and forth before what it's going to be used for. We're looking forward to the right conversation around how to value solar or intermittent sources or other renewables in Maryland. We have our position. That's not for today. But we look forward to that conversation, and we want to make sure the study is right. The study has quality information in it. And candidly, right now, we have a lot of questions and concerns, more so than being able to take this and run with it.
If I could, and the sharing of information, I think we need to have some discussion after this on how we do that, but we'd be open to a technical session with you folks, where some of our experts sit down with your experts. But of course, I know we have an NDA, but we need to make sure that NDA covers sharing of information. Some of the models we use are proprietary, So we'll need to figure out how to do that. We can definitely share inputs and outputs and chat with you about how the model works.
Oh, we'd appreciate that. As far as we can get it, we'd appreciate that. So we too would recommend the benefits be put in a proper context. It wasn't just the chart and the text and how the report presents the total valuation makes it feel like it's all coming in the utility rate or revenue stream. Maryland is deregulated. We have a distribution and delivery service. The energy market controls energy price. The other benefits are out there against the SREC value, the incentive value, the tax value, all of that other stuff. So if in this report, if it can be repositioned such that here's the value stream, I'm not going to take issue with, the blocks and the stacks, but take it apart. If you're going to talk about compensation, here's what flows in this channel, here's what's in that channel. That I think is important to the message that I think a couple of us have raised so far. We did note, we just had reviewed the Daymark study for the co-ops, and it looked like we took some differences in assumptions, so maybe another point you look at that and kind of say, okay, life changed, and maybe here's why. That study was February of 17, I believe, so it wasn't too long ago, and it also was similar footprint, but yes, it was a co-op. So you take the rates and impact to the ratepayer and that model, that side out, we understand that, but just some of the other assumptions, we didn't look like they were the same. Economic benefits, we echo the questions and concerns, and again, the use of that value component where it's going to go. The study was not, I heard the comment earlier, well, you probably wouldn't consider this in compensation rate design. Let the study be clear, and that it's there for education or information, but it isn't what you would recommend be considered. That part is really a heavy hammer. And along with that, and I think other parties have mentioned it, the offsetting impacts. If you put this much robust solar on the grid, what are you displacing elsewhere? How many jobs are you displacing elsewhere? How many restaurants are closing down because those power plants are no longer serving that community, that town? So while there's maybe an upside, there's also another side to the seesaw. Move down to the maximum nameplate, the hosting capacity. So if you look at just the numbers, you've got 19,800 megawatts of capacity, potential capacity on the BG grid. Our max load several years ago was 7,500 megawatts. And any time we've done a hosting study and done our analysis, the max capacity for intermittent generation on the feeder is less than max load. Yet your numbers are coming out 2 and 3 times. We really didn't see how, and I will say this, the numbers are similar, perhaps not the same magnitude, but the technical engineering team at Pepco and Delmarva have echoed the same concerns. We're throwing this huge number out there, and I won't be facetious, say it looks like a simple sum of nameplates. You've got 100 feeders at this capacity added to this many transformers, to that many transmission feeders, but that's not a way to value solar on the grid. So first, the offer is we have a team that has done detailed hosting studies of particular feeders in the footprint. That team is open and willing to talk and go through details of that and let you see how that came out. The other part is it really, as we looked at these numbers, the first reaction is we take these feeders, they already have automated distribution, automated restoration capabilities on them. They already have voltage compensation mechanism on them. That feeder might carry 8 megawatts at a maximum capacity of load. That's not generation, that's load. If something happens to a segment of that feeder, it automatically switches to another. So that second feeder backs it up and is now carrying 10 or now carrying 11 megawatts. So all of that redundancy, all of that cross consideration, our thought is that should be factored into these numbers as you come up with, well, what's the total technical potential? So, energy and capacity forecasts. One of the key things we noted, you referenced the studies in there and reference the forward look. They're in 17. Our experience, though, is our grid load is actually declining. our customer use is actually declining. If you look at the next study, you'll see that capacity and peak demands are now falling and no longer increasing. So as we look at the charts and capacity values and others are increasing, the very next study says they're coming down. So you may want to look at that as we're doing it. And I realize the snapshot in time and time you have to do the work. It's just that our market, though, has turned significantly in 5 years. And you go to and we'll talk about that more in the distribution investment, whether it's transmission or distribution side as well. Price suppression, we really believe that that's going to be built into other factors, whether it's PJM, whether it's forward markets, and concerned whether or not it should be something that's included in those hard, tangible values that roll into that further conversation. Avoided rec purchases, if we look at that in question, and this is just a question to follow up later on, we believe that might be double counted because it shows up in the market, but then you have the non-monetized CO2 social benefit, so there's streams that are already recognizing that value when you look at buying energy. So just give that some thought as well as to, do we have that clear as we look at this going forward. Transmission benefits and distribution benefits, go back to my setup that load is actually declining. When you look at our investment slates, and I know we provided that information in a 2-year snapshot, and candidly with transmission in particular, it's a plan based on a forecast, and that plan always changes. So I appreciate that you use a shorter window of time and harder numbers with that. And we're seeing fewer and fewer and fewer capacity increase projects. There's a limited number. There's some major developments in our footprint that are right up against the water. So in order to get that large load to them from wherever you are, you're going to build distribution, you're going to build capacity to get to them. But the large majority of the investment, transmission, and particularly distribution, is infrastructure renewal. Replacing transformers has been out there 35 years, 40, 45 years. Worn potheads. Aged conductors that are aged to the weathering elements and the constant wear and tear of being on the grid. Our planning engineers, our technical specialists constantly tell me that, yes, you put solar on the rooftop and it depresses the load on that feeder from maybe 9 or 10 in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But the transformer, the connectors, the paddles on the back of the spade lugs, all of them are carrying energy, whether it's going in or coming out. It's like a highway. The cars are constantly moving on the highway. The wear and the degradation is going to be there. In many of our service territories across this broad footprint, some of these feeders are winter peaking feeders. You have a 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. rather, February 2nd peak. A solar facility is not going to help it without other storage or other capability. So the general evaluation that, yes, there's pros and cons on the system, some are wins, some are losers, we're 100% with you on that. And just as we look at the hosting, look at these other elements to take the rest of that in context as well. So, just wrap up. We very eager to talk in more detail, see more detail, and work with you on trying to refine, the different aspects of this.
Thank you.
My name is Bob Taylor. I'm Energy Pathways. I'll be very brief. I just want to register another viewpoint that I think it would be very beneficial to put distribution benefits somehow on the graph rather than just a footnote saying that they're locational and it depends, which we know. I saw also in the text the estimate that David referred to that in general, a few cents to 10 cents, depending on locational value, was a benefit for reduced need of construction and to meet load and distribution system. That's critical. I mean, and the magnitude of the numbers, several cents to 10 cents makes all the difference when you're looking at rate-making issue. So I think it's really important to find some way to try to include an estimate, even with if it's got caveats and so forth, and that we know that. But this just leaves it so it's not there at all, because it's not on the graph that everyone will look at. Another part of that are the losses. I saw you have a really nice table 56, back in the text, which estimates the losses, marginal reduction in losses due to solar for the 4 IOUs. Some of them are pretty high. Pepco, it's over 10% in there. Those are numbers that are easily could be included some kind of quantification or at least considered for that. And finally, there was discussion of case studies to show out the locational value and those points. And our colleague from MEA also was querying about that, whether something from Maryland could be included. My question is, all the utilities as part of the rate review process include a lot of data on investment in distribution systems, especially renewal, especially upgrade, and can't some of that be accessed in order to give some of the data that then was then cited that you would need in order to do case studies? Some of that would seem to be available as part of the regulatory process. Also, there might be some macro level investment data that could give some bearing to that few cents to 10 cents. So I just, I think it's really important to include that, and that's my comment. Thanks. The distribution losses, is it not correct that they're not included in those numbers there? I see transmission, but I don't see anything about the reduced distribution losses. Is that correct, that it's not on that graph?
They're in there. I think they are in there, actually.
Where?
The distribution.
I can't point it out to you, but I remember the discussion that we were including losses in all of the calculation, reduced losses, so we can get back to you.
Yeah, I know
Okay.
it's included in the capacity
I
price
think it's
forecast
important.
that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Important to say, notice that Mr. Magajani, who made comments here, was saying, you didn't include it all. That's not, it doesn't make sense. I heard him say that, so.
Wayne, could you speak to the data that you received in conjunction with the utilities relative to the distribution analysis that you did in response to this gentleman's question?
Well, we did some calculations of impact on distribution losses, and I don't know if Asa Sproul is still on the phone or not, but he could answer better than me. But in case he doesn't chime in, my recollection is that we took a typical circuit and did a model run of it with and without the addition of solar, and looked at the difference in losses and extrapolated that to the whole system. When we came up with 4 different numbers for the 4 utilities studied, and those, while we calculated on the distribution system, I think that went into the that went into the transmission calculations, because that's we aggregated that up and rolled it through to what its impact would be on the transmission system.
I would just submit
Yeah,
that information is really useful.
So what we did is we looked at the losses at peak load with no solar considered for a full system, and then we reduced the load by the amount of solar that we were considering across a couple different increments, and then looked at those losses, and then compared those during the hours of the day we would expect solar to be generating during a 24-hour period, and then varied those factors among the 12 months to essentially create an 8760 profile of how losses would be reduced throughout the year. So that's what this table was built on.
So how much is it? Is it in that table? If so, how so? Maybe you could discuss. And then finally, what are the cents per kilowatt hour or partial cents per kilowatt hour that are analogous to that table? It'd be useful. Otherwise, it's just hidden in the back. We don't even know that it was addressed.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
I think that ended up in the transmission section. But I'm not sure I can find it quickly.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. We've got another question coming.
Good afternoon. My name is David Murray. I'm Executive Director of MDVCA. We're the local solar trade association for the state of Maryland. First of all, I just wanted to express appreciation for the stakeholder engagement and the rigorous process that you all went through to gather information from many different parties in creating this report. As a representative of the solar industry, we have about 5,300 jobs in the state of Maryland, and so thus we've talked a lot about economic benefits this afternoon, and I wanted to emphasize that, you know, by increasing the amount of solar by approximately 4 to 5 times the amount, 2,200 job years is a pretty fair estimate of the kind of benefits that you'll see from increasing solar deployment throughout the next 10 years. Solar is one of the most job-rich forms of energy generation, and so I think that you know, we look forward to continue to working with you all on assessing and estimating the economic benefits from increased solar deployment. Another thing that I wanted to emphasize was the kind of location-specific benefits of solar energy, and I know that several folks here have sort of discussed you know, how the PSC could be helped in terms of seeing what parts of the state need solar the most and where ratepayers would see the most savings from increased solar generation. As Arjun pointed out, different neighborhoods even have a different value of solar, and so kind of providing or adding to your analysis kind of the location-specific benefits of solar would be most appreciated. But other than that, just wanted to say, you know, we appreciate the work that you all have done and look forward to continue working with you all.
Bill Fields, Office of People's Counsel again. I been thinking about those gray bars, and I wanted to ask a couple questions to see if I was getting the ideas right. That's the utility scale one. So, am I right in thinking that those gray bars would be the same if we were talking about the benefits of a natural gas plant? That, assuming it costs the same as whatever you assumed that the solar plant would cost.
I don't think, Matt, you want to answer?
Well, the calculation for how you get to those benefits through in-plan, it matters how the industry is structured. So, you know, a gas plant's going to be a little bit different than a solar facility as far as the.
But if you assume that the cost structure, the labor, and the capital, and all that were the same to produce that much output through a gas plant, then the gray bars would be the same, right?
I think what Matt is telling you is that when you use the in-plan model, you're actually looking at the inputs and how the inputs are structured. There would be probably a magnitude similarity, but they wouldn't be the same. And I think that's what he's struggling with, trying not to agree to that.
There's a large material component.
Yeah.
So I mean, the materials is a large component of that, and we didn't, for example, in this study, like we didn't include the, you know, the large pieces of hardware that aren't manufactured in this country. Like the panels are not manufactured in the U.S., so you can't realistically include them in the analysis.
Yeah.
But in the sense of a gas plant, it's more likely that those. I mean, I'm not entirely sure on that, but it's more likely that those would be. So that would be a larger component.
And this is specific to Maryland too, right? So if the natural gas turbines were manufactured in Maryland, they would be included, but if they're not, which seems likely, they would not. So I think this is the economic benefits is fairly solar specific. Okay. I don't think you could say that it would be the same.
No, I'm following you. You're answering my question. My second question, I think you already started to answer, was, is this looking at only the purchases, the spending that would go along with putting these facilities in that would stay in Maryland, as opposed to going to, as you said, a panel manufacturer, you know, out of state or out of the country?
The assumption is that it would be completely Maryland. Oh. Obviously, that would be. There's no legitimate way you can easily say 10% is going elsewhere. You just don't know, because Maryland is bordered by several other areas where employees could live. You know, where, I mean, if you're on the fringe of any of those states, that's going to push those benefits into another state. So the way I look at this is a cap to what that could potentially be And as was correctly noted, this would be a gross cap. This, the opportunity cost would not be.
But Matt, you also said that the panel costs weren't included because the panels were manufactured elsewhere. So it's so it's not like we took the entire installed costs and that became the economic benefit. There was a look at which pieces could legitimately be experienced in Maryland. That makes sense. So the labor costs were included. And I think what Matt's saying is it's possible you have a employee who doesn't actually live in the state and may take some of those dollars elsewhere. But there was an attempt to distinguish which pieces could impact Maryland's economy.
Okay, so, all right, so I thought before you were saying that all of the costs are assumed to be in Maryland, but now you're saying that some of them might be taken out.
I think it's all of the costs but the panel costs. Is that correct?
I think we'll get back to you on what is and is not included, but we're trying to reflect those costs and that investment that would remain in Maryland. So if there were components of the solar that we knew would be going elsewhere, they weren't included in the investment here.
You're assuming 100% of the labor cost stayed in Maryland, even though you recognize that a lot of people who work in Maryland might live in Virginia.
Exactly, because you can't necessarily figure out what that.
But you could have gone and said, let's say 50% of the people stay in Maryland, or 75%. You could have picked some number.
You could have done that.
You did. You picked 100.
Okay. Well, if you could just follow up and tell us which costs are actually in the, go into the inputs to get these numbers, that would be helpful. On the transmission, I want to make sure I understood because there was some discussion back and forth about it. You've got avoided transmission investment there, and then I think you were saying the other side of that would be the transmission charge itself. And am I understanding it right that you don't have that as a benefit because the way I understand it, most of that charge comes from embedded plant that's going to be paid for even if we reduce our load, say here in BGE, we still have to pay for that. Am I understanding that right, what you're saying?
No, we do have a benefit for transmission charge, and I think it's only for behind-the-meter resources. As you notice, it's only it's quite a small benefit because you can't even see it on the chart. But we do have a benefit for the transmission charge for behind-the-meter resources because the way that charge is calculated is it's based on the peak load during some specific hours. And so the idea is if you have solar, and we looked at solar generation during those, it's the peak load during specific hours, and they're not just set, it's when the actual peaks happened. So we looked historically when those peaks happened and how much solar was being generated. And so the idea is that behind the meter resources, how much would they reduce the peak during those times that historically the peak had happened. And so we did calculate a transmission charge benefit for behind the meter resources.
Okay. Now, but did you apply that to, so you assume that, or you find that a certain reduction in metered load at those peak times. Did you apply all of that load reduction to the the current charges? Is that what you did?
So we have I believe we have a forecast of the charges.
A forecast, okay. But you applied it to the full charge?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, I guess I'm asking because the way I understand that that the way the rates, the transmission rates work is there is a revenue requirement that the utility needs for, that it changes every year because of the formula rates, that the utility needs for to collect from the service territory. If we reduce our peak load, that's going to raise the rate because they still need that revenue requirement. Is that factored into what you're doing?
It is factored in. There's in the transmission section, there's actually a table that goes through the calculation, and it's only BGE is the only entity that's actually in Maryland. All the other utilities have service territories outside the state, so you have to take that into account. BG was the only one not looked at in that case because it's 100%. So if you reduce it, then people in BG are going to still pay that same rate.
Right,
But
that's what I'm getting.
for the other service, it was reduced. It's more like a 30% value or smaller that's taken away because it's only the utility service territory that you're looking at. You can't apply that full percentage. And then it is like you said, there's like a benefit, and then there's a negative of it taken away, and that is offset in the table, and that final result does end up in there.
Okay.
I don't know what page offhand the table is, but it's
All right.
in the transmission section.
Okay, I think I follow you. All right, thanks.
Just, can I ask one more question? Or am I cutting it? No, okay. And I won't ask specific, I'll just ask you guys if you could help. I ended up getting a little confused on how you were dealing with distribution or line losses, transmission and distribution line losses, and where they were. I heard the person on the phone describe one piece of the calculation, which would be the change in line losses, a peak valuation methodology driven by the presence of the solar, but there's also just the avoided line losses, a multiplier upstream wherever it applies, like avoided generation. Like the CPR studies do it by using a 1.09 times the value or something like that. So could you guys just help clarify how that's reflected and whether it's reflected in these charts or just that table, or that table is what's reflected in these charts anyway?
Yeah, I think that's something that we'll just clarify in the next draft. Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me. This is not a question for you, but I would like you to think about this. We're talking about cost and benefit analysis for the, ratepayer in Maryland and maybe entourage here also. But I would like to bring your attention to think about also, because if you consider solar to come in Maryland, some people has to invest their money to build the solar here in Maryland. So the money has to come from somewhere, whether PEPCO decide to build or BG&E decide to build here. But every firm looking at, in order to invest, you have to have some profit in your mind to invest. You have to forecast your profit, how to invest, something like that. And then that profit, expected profit for the firm, drive them to come to Maryland. Or the money can flow somewhere else. So, or maybe nobody will build solar. They will put in the gas power plant. So, and then I want you to think about what is the growth rate of somebody who would like to invest their money into the solar in this place, Maryland, compared to the benefit of what you talking here. So you want to motivate some firm also to come here to put their money in this, because not all the people, ratepayer has to have money to invest. Utility can decide to invest a lot of money. An investor can come here and invest a lot of money, but their motivation is profit. And that profit also is related, expected profit, 2, 3 years, 4 years ahead. And that also related to the interest rate and inflation, all those things. And a lot of fluctuation in the economic also. You need to have that expected growth rate for the firms compared to the benefit of these studies, so you can motivate not one side, but all sides to get this market to work. Thank you. You didn't cover that in your studies, but it's something to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Just have 2 more quick comments. The first is that on the distribution location-specific benefits, I think one of you had said that in some instances you actually had determined that there was a cost.
That was Wayne.
Okay, I think it would be very helpful to at least note that in, I would advise personally against including distribution benefits in the stack if you can't, since they're, as you have already done. But it is important to note that because you're talking about location-specific siting, you need to acknowledge that in some places there is a cost to put in additional solar resources. And the second is not to continue to go back to these gray bars, but I did think that what John had mentioned was really important. Your gray bars are predicated on your solar potential calculations, and if he is telling you that those are way outside of the range of the projected load and the capacity needs of the company, then you should go back and revisit your solar potential. And that would then translate into the economic benefits.
Yeah, just to clarify, the solar potential that we calculated was significantly greater than the amount of solar that we modeled. As I said, we added about 4,700 megawatts, and I think our solar potential was 31,000. So,
but you made a decision about how much of that you modeled to factor in, right? So
yeah.
You should be also considering what is realistic on the system based on what you can consult with the companies about.
The modeled level that is in here is quite a bit lower than the potential that we estimated, but we will go back and check and make sure the numbers all agree.
Yeah.
Based on all the comments and all the information provided today, for sure. That's why we're having this discussion.
Any other questions or comments on the phone? Okay.
We had a date that we talked about to ask for final comments, but I noted the exchange here between Daymark and some of the folks testifying on offering a session, I think a working session, technical session, maybe a technical term that I won't use. So I think that date is now probably unrealistic by the time we set that up to happen. So, I mean, it was going to be May 24th, so stay tuned. We'll let you know. But if we're going to talk to them about setting up another session, that may move backwards. Carl, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, given the importance of this, maybe stick with your comment deadline, but leave yourself open to another round of comments after the session, because then the comments might inform what needs to be addressed in the session. It's more process, I know, and it's more time, billable hours, but a first round of comments might reveal things we want to talk about.
Well, I'm just an advisor, so I'm going to look at Andrew, and then I'm going to look at the consultant that has to do the work.
Sure, we'll ask. Any other one?
Yeah, this is Damon Krieger from BGE. So, my understanding of how this process was supposed to unfold is it really was supposed to be a collaborative process. And while the comments exchanged today have been very helpful, I think this room is not really conducive to that type of engagement between all the stakeholders. And I think a lot of them are on the phone that may very well want to participate in such a dialogue. So I would encourage, one may not be sufficient. 1, 2, 3, whatever it takes to make sure everybody's heard and everybody has an opportunity to examine, thoroughly vet the underlying data for this report. I mean, I think everybody wants that opportunity. And so I would encourage for those sessions to happen before Daymark finalizes its report. And then it feels like that's the point in time where they've accepted that they're final in terms of their mind, where things are at. Then we would submit the written comments, in terms of whatever the final report is. But it really should be a collaborative opportunity.
If everyone can stay committed to the process, Damon, I think that's a good idea. We just want to keep everyone engaged and also not shoot for false precision, right? I mean, the harder you look at any of these numbers, you'll deconstruct them, right? But we're not looking to do that. We're just looking to make the study as good as it can be for an overall study.
Accuracy is paramount. So. Yeah. Thanks.
So then we're all set then for not quite having a concrete written deadline of May 24th. We're going to revisit that and let everybody know. Are we on the same page?
I think so. What we'll try to do is pick some dates with Daymark. We'll need a good facility so folks can call in, and this room happens to be the only one, in my experience, at the commission that's good. So if there's a sense that this doesn't work, we'll need to work with some stakeholders to get a good facility where everyone can hear, because participation will be important for folks in that type of session. And we had good participation today, so thank you, but we just don't want folks to dribble away.
Okay, great. Anything else for the good of the order here, or no?
What was your thinking about the May 24th? And I know, was there going to be another draft before then, or any response to what we heard today, or are you going to think about that now?
I think at this point we're looking to have a technical, or however you choose to phrase it,
Okay.
meeting, and then after that point we'll have a set of written comments, a written comment deadline. But overall, we'll see how it goes. We will not have a written comment deadline before May 24th.
Could you guys supply some kind of more detailed background on how you generated the economic benefits in terms of just, I still think that gray bar was left kind of gray. And I think if we're going to have a technical meeting where people are going to actually exchange information, it'd be nice to see the subcategories that you alluded to at the beginning that went into summing to that gray bar in more detail in advance of a technical meeting.
I was going to talk about a little bit more process. I think some parties have asked for that type of detailed information. You heard Daymark say that they would want, they're not crazy about giving away their work product, particularly to consultants who might give them, or to parties who might give them to other consultants, which is perfectly understandable. So they would want a non-disclosure agreement signed, and so I think for one, there'll be a little bit of process, and that could go out maybe as early as, well, very soon. But it means you're all going to look at that. From my experience, that takes a little bit of back and forth. And if any of you, obviously some of you have the technical ability to look at those issues and make sense of them, and others of you may need other people to look at those. So that's just a heads up there. If that's going to be part of the process going forward, which is also factoring into my thought and pushing the timing back. Does that sound? Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments before we wrap up? If not, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.